20 here, Big 550 KTRS. Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist, joins us every Tuesday and Thursday. Nice enough to grace us with your presence. Good morning, Tony.
Good to be in studio again.
Yes, it is. Good to be in studio. All right. So, what's going on in Ferguson? I thought everyone agreed to what the Justice Department agreed to, and they were all working together and all headed in the right direction.
Well, they should be, but Stephen Deere, reporter at the Post-Dispatch, one of my colleagues, had a tremendous story yesterday on the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that shows that, no, there's still a bunch of people involved in the municipal court system who want to get their cash. They want to get paid, and they don't care who they have to run over to get it. The basics of the story is this. One of the charges that the Ferguson police and lots of the municipal police departments in that part of the county used to charge poor people with all the time, and not just poor people, but they used it a lot during the protest, is failure to comply. And on one hand, the concept is, hey, a police officer tells you to do something, you should probably do it, and if you don't, then you might get charged. The problem is, as the Justice Department found, and as a lot of reporting has found over the last couple of years, police were using in Ferguson the failure to comply charge as a way to basically abuse people in an unconstitutional fashion. A failure to comply charge has to be constitutional. It has to be reasonable. The person has to have heard it and understand it, and et cetera. And here's an example. Early on in the Ferguson protests, this almost happened to me. I was out on West Florissant Avenue one evening interviewing people, and a police officer said, "You've got to move on." I'm standing there. I'm interviewing a woman who's pushing a child in a stroller.
Right.
And he says, no, you have to move on. You can't stand for more than 5 seconds in one place. This was a rule that they were trying to enforce. Mm-hmm. At the time, not wanting to go to jail because I was doing my job, I kept walking. It made interviewing people a little bit more difficult.
Right.
But not everybody did. And several people, from protesters to bystanders to reporters, were then charged with failure to comply until some attorneys filed a lawsuit over it, went to the court, and the court said no. That's unconstitutional. You can't tell people that they have to walk every 5 seconds on a public sidewalk. And so a lot of those charges still exist in the Ferguson court system. And what's happening is Ferguson's prosecuting attorney, Stephanie Carr, and her favored law firm, Curtis Hines, O'Keefe and Deedham and Chudum or whatever they're called, they're taking all of these cases and prosecuting them. The fine is $150. They're billing Ferguson, which is broke, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to take these cases, 40% of which they're losing because people are fighting it because they're ticked off.
Right.
This is the kind of thing that was going on for decades before the Ferguson protests happened, where cities were using their police forces and their municipal courts as fundraisers instead of for public safety. And
sounds to me like it's a pretty bad fundraiser, though, if they're paying the lawyers thousands and they're losing 40% of them.
Yeah, they're losing money. They're not making any money. The only people making money are the private attorneys who happen to be the same attorneys who are running the municipal court system because they're operating as judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys, often in the same municipalities.
So it's another way for these muni courts to help fund themselves.
It's another way for the private attorneys who are running the muni courts to fund themselves on the backs of taxpayers. Taxpayers ought to be offended because prosecutors should show a little bit more judgment. You don't take cases that are losers just because you're ticked off that you've been in the news for the last 2 years.
Right. Well, and also, there's also prosecutorial discretion, right? Why these failure to comply? I get it. It was a heightened sense of emergency. It was this, it was that. But now that cooler heads have prevailed and we've sort of passed through the crisis, they should just let these things go away.
Drop the charges.
Right.
There was one great example in the story. I forget the gentleman's name, but he owns a lawn business. And he and one of his employees, the employee was driving the truck. They're driving somewhere. They get pulled over for some reason. I don't know why. I don't think they got a ticket for that. But when the police officer pulls him over, he asks the guy who owns the business, who's sitting in the passenger seat, to produce his ID. And the guy reaches for his wallet, but he also says to the cop, you have no probable cause to ask me for my ID. He's absolutely right.
Right.
I don't need to provide you this ID. He did anyway.
Right.
Because he's a citizen who, like me in that situation, didn't want to be arrested. He provides the ID after arguing with the officer about his right to ask for it, and he gets charged with failure to comply anyway. And then later that day, his company was on the way to mow some weeds in an area where he owns property. Got a ticket for the weeds being too high because he was stuck dealing with the police officer. I mean, this is just simple harassment so that some private attorneys who have this great, sweet deal that's unlike anything anywhere else in the country can make some money, and it's disgusting.
It's really, it's insidious how they just keep finding ways to do this stuff. I mean, right? Every time somebody stamps it out, they find another way to do it.
I hope the Missouri Supreme Court read that story by Stephen Deere because they still haven't issued their new rules on muni courts, and they can fix this.
Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, a postscript to a story. Your story about the Catholic worker who couldn't get unemployment benefits because the Archdiocese doesn't pay unemployment insurance. Is it true that that's the most commented story in the history of STL Today?
It's the biggest one I've ever had.
Gotcha.
It was crazy. It was the top read story for like 3 days on the Post-Dispatch website. Yeah. And it wasn't one that I expected to resonate in that way, but it really has. And another postscript to that story, a couple of readers called wanting to help this person out.
Yeah.
And I know that at least one school has received this person's resume as a result of the column.
Good.
And, it's nice when readers of the Post-Dispatch want to help folks out.
Sure. STLtoday.com every Tuesday and Thursday here on the Big 550 KHRS. Tony, thanks for